It's the Michael Patrick Leahy Show, broadcasting live from downtown Nashville. Now, here's Michael Patrick Leahy.
And welcome to the John Fredericks Radio Network. We also welcome in studio our very good friend, one of the very best attorneys in the entire United States of America, Braden Buchek with the Southeastern Legal Foundation. Welcome, Braden.
Thank you. Am I no longer an all-star panelist? I don't get that far.
Of course you are an all-star panelist.
I didn't hear that in my bio.
We had to lead with we had to lead, of course, with the most important element, that you're one of the best attorneys in the country. And then next we say, it's like, for God, for country, for Harvard.
I think that's fair. Right. I think that's fair.
Then you're an all-star panelist.
Right.
Okay. It's time for the morning rundown for Wednesday, December 11th, 2024, 2 weeks before Christmas. Brought to you by our friends at the Glock Store, glockstore.com, right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Here we go. Here's the morning rundown. Number one, Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old Ivy League graduate, arrested for the murder of a United Healthcare CEO. Apparently, when he was captured on Monday, had a 3-page, 262-word written manifesto. A transcript of that manifesto has been leaked, apparently, all over the place. We haven't seen the actual manifesto. It's interesting. Within 10 hours of the Altoona Police Department, New York Police Department, getting that manifesto, it was leaked, not officially released. The Covenant Killer Manifesto, 1,000 pages, which we've been seeking for over a year and a half, still has not been released. How about that? A little difference there. Number two, Daniel Penny. You saw this, was acquitted of all charges on Monday. There's a terrific interview that'll be airing today on Fox Nation. Judge Denise Pirro. I saw parts of it. Really good. Highly recommend it. Number three. Okay, this is a little, what's the right word? Catty? Is this catty? I don't know. Let me just say, Donald Trump is making more appointments. So Donald Trump Jr. apparently just broke up with Kimberly Guilfoyle. And immediately thereafter, his dad announced she's now the new ambassador to Greece. Avoiding awkward moments at Mar-a-Lago, apparently. And number four, the Southeastern Legal Foundation has a terrific documentary out on federal overreach, and you're going to be talking with us about that over the phone.
Absolutely.
Or in person here.
In
rather.
person, even.
In person. Right. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for that. Oh, there you go. The morning rundown is brought to you by our friends at the Glock Store. Braden, have you been to the Glock Store yet?
No, but I'm curious.
You need to go. You are Glock Store curious.
I'm Glock curious.
So our good friend Lenny McGill is the founder and CEO of the Glock Store. He said their Black Friday deal days were a huge success, including an uptick in sales from cities that get the Michael Patrick Leahy Show all over the United States.
I wonder
of
if that's a
America.
coincidence.
It's not. It is cause and effect. Now, if you missed out on a few of the deals, don't worry. They'll be launching their Christmas sales soon enough with even more great deals on Glocks, performance parts, and all the great accessories they stock. And they only stock the best because they personally test each one. If Lenny McGill doesn't like it, it doesn't get on, period. Also, this is really interesting. Lenny features all these products on his YouTube channel. Over 500,000 subscribers, nearly 1,000 videos. If you want to learn how to shoot a gun, go to youtube.com/@Glock Store. And don't forget to go to glockstore.com and sign up for their weekly sales letters. You'll even get a link to the latest Lenny video every Wednesday afternoon. That's glockstore.com. I'm going to take you there personally.
I want to go.
It's something else.
Yeah.
You go to the Shoot 270 ranges.
Yeah, I got a 16-year-old boy. He definitely wants to go.
Oh, we'll bring you both.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, let's talk about government overreach. Your whole life, Braden, has been dedicated to fighting government overreach. You've worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I think, haven't you?
That's right. As I was at Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office, both Nashville and Memphis.
So you've seen that office in Memphis and Nashville.
I think it's fair to say I've seen government at its best and government at its worst.
You went from there to the Beacon Center, now with the Southeastern Legal Foundation. You've got a new documentary out talking about government overreach. And it's this obscure agency. They have so many agencies, right?
Yes.
It's like 500 agents. They all have like 3 or 4 letters. Noah. It's not the guy who built the ark in the Bible.
It's spelled differently too.
It's NOAA. What's that stand for?
National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, I believe.
And you think about that. Oh well, of course we need a what?
It's. I think its core mission is basically to be a weather agency.
Okay. That's all good.
Which is great. It's a fantastic weather app. If you ever need the weather, go on to NOAA's website.
Okay. But they do more than that.
They do more than that. Among other things, they're charged with enforcing certain parts of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. And in the fading days of this administration, they have come out with a rule that will probably alarm a great number of your viewers. And of course, your viewers and listeners, I should say, are probably not easily surprised by the overreach that that this administration has exhibited through some of its rules. But I think even this one would startle even them.
Okay, so first, what is it with the Biden administration? They're on the way out. We got 39 days until 47. 39 days. They seem to be trying to push every crazy idea through in the last 39 days.
It's tactical. It's a flood the zone strategy. It gums up the works for the incoming administration, and it gives their side something to sue over if these rules are enacted or repealed.
Okay. How crazy is this? Tell us what this regulation is.
Sure. So the proposed rule applies to nearly the entire Atlantic seaboard. And what it does is it sets a seasonal speed limit of 10 knots for boats 35 feet and up. And that's the size of a common pleasure boat, and certainly all fishing vessels up and down the East Coast. And 10 knots, for those of your listeners who aren't sure, is roughly the speed of a golf cart. In fact, it's slower than most modern golf carts.
Putt.
So for half the year, and particularly in the winter months when there's a great deal of chop, you will not be able to go faster than a golf cart in open water, which for all intents and purposes makes boating impossible.
So let me just ask you a basic question. Why?
It's a save the whales thing. So supposedly whales, which are of course way bigger than the size of these boats that are regulated, are being struck by boaters traveling more than 10 knots. Now, of course, no boater on Earth wants to hit a whale, not just because they're the ultimate conservationists, but because it presents a mortal threat to not just the whale, but also the craft and crew. So no one is hitting these whales intentionally. So it's dubious to me that threatening to punish boaters with jail time and crippling fines is a way of getting them to avoid whales.
So you talked about this rulemaking process. And just for our listeners who aren't familiar with the Administrative Procedures Act of 1950, or the process by which all of these 500 regulatory agencies Congress will pass a law. And the law will say,
agency, go make a law.
Agency, go provide specific,
Correct.
Detailed regulations. And then there's this regulatory process they go through.
They're the same as laws. And I mean, we're all taught the Schoolhouse Rock version of how laws are formed in the 3 branches of government. That's not the real system of government under which any living American has labored. As you alluded to, the way it works under the Administrative Procedure Act, which has largely supplanted the regular legislative process at the federal level, is there is a high-level federal law that then gives legislative power to an executive branch agency to create law. Mm-hmm. And I mean, a great example that everyone's going to be familiar with is the Obamacare. The law itself says essentially there shall be health care, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall define what that shall mean. And then it's up to the secretary to fill in the blanks as to what all of that means.
And how that happens
in general, regulatory process.
We'll get to that after the break. It goes through the regulatory process, but how that happens and how long it takes and what the impact is, we'll talk about that when we get back.
Welcome back to the Michael Patrick Leahy Show.
We are
now,
delighted.
Here's Michael Patrick Leahy.
We're delighted to have in studio our very good friend, Brad Buczek, with the Southeastern Legal Foundation, one of the best attorneys in the United States of America, and my good friend. Now,
And an all-star panelist.
and an all-star panelist. Thank you for reminding me.
Dropping that from my bio.
I gotta be.
That was hard earned.
It was.
You don't just hand those things out.
I don't.
Yeah.
So, talk about this bizarre rule. How did it come about? Or is it a rule yet, or is it going through the process?
It is in the absolute final stages. It could drop any day. It's done everything it needs to do.
It's not. So, what's the statutory basis for doing a 10 knot per hour speed limit on the Atlantic seaboard?
It's a great point, and it illuminates all the problems with administrative law and the process that I described before the break. So the Marine Mammal Protection Act is an act that probably most people agree with. It protects whales and says they shall be endangered and we shall protect them. But the rulemaking portion of it just says that the secretary shall take all necessary and appropriate actions to ensure the survival of the species.
Now, that would be called overly broad.
That is a broad and vague delegation of power to the secretary.
So Congress, that's what they do all the time.
Sure. And when Congress wrote that in 1972, do we really think they were thinking that one day the secretary of a sub-agency, it isn't even NOAA, it's NOAA's sub-agency, the National Marine Fisheries Service.
Within NOAA.
Within NOAA.
And NOAA's within what? Commerce? Where
Commerce.
Is it? Commerce, okay.
Yep. That one day the head of the agency, sub-agency that decides fish catches is going to be able to promulgate a rule that will effectively destroy an entire coastal way of life.
But this is based upon his interpretation. Now, this would be, 52 years after the law was passed? Has there been any subsequent statutory activity?
No, not in any way that would help the case. I mean, this is the necessary and appropriate language has been there since 1972.
Did somebody in this fisheries sub-agency wake up one morning and say, I got to put a speed limit on all these?
No, and so one of the unique aspects of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act is that it essentially allows anybody, any interested person, to initiate rulemaking and to sue an agency for failing to implement it. So there are very well-funded conservation groups out there that exist to do nothing more than badger these agencies to enact rules and then sue them when they don't. And a lot of times it's like pushing on an open door depending on who's in charge. So case in point, there are environmental groups that have been lobbying for a speed restriction rule on the Atlantic coast for decades, at least going back to the 90s.
It's funny. They want to put speed limits on boats out in the ocean.
Yes.
In the Atlantic. But, I mean, they're a bunch of Karens, right? I mean, what are they? They're schoolmarm types? Don't do this?
I'm not going to comment on that. Right, yeah. But, the interesting thing about this one is in 2003, so we're literally talking 20 years ago, Congress held a hearing on whether or not they should give the statutory authority to the agency to enact a speed limit rule because of the perception that whales are being struck by boats. So what's interesting about that is an implicit acknowledgement that the secretary did not have existing authority as of 2003. And NOAA's secretary and NOAA's own witnesses testified at these hearings, we cannot do this under existing law. And then,
but 20 years later, apparently they can't.
Well, it gets there's another development because late in the Trump administration, they finally just sued the agency in the District of Columbia for the failure to enact the rule.
You said the magic bad word.
Right.
District of Columbia Federal Courts.
Right.
My goodness.
And, of course, the Trump administration defended their actions that they'd taken thus far. And then when the administration flipped over, a settlement was reached. Yeah.
Yeah. It was all insider baseball.
And then the agency decided that they would go forth and promulgate these regulations. And that, of course, can result not just in the enactment of the rule that the lobbyists want, but it can also result in award of attorney's fees as pursuant to any settlement.
So when you promulgate a rule,
it's back scratching all the way around.
They put out these lengthy rules for public comment for a period of time.
That's right. That's how that works.
And then after they review the comment, they go through a process of finalizing the rules. And then when they publish it to the Federal Register of Rules, it's the law.
That's right. It is no different from a law. You have to obey it. It's not a suggestion. And this law, like many regulations, carries with it criminal punishment and crippling civil fines.
So it's likely to
even though nobody ever voted on it. That's the critical difference between a regulation and a law. It's not less mandatory. It just means you can't vote on it or hold the person who voted for it accountable.
So it's likely to become a rule, a published rule, any day.
It could become a rule any day, and it would not be uncommon for an outgoing administration to just crank it out and leave a mess behind for the incoming administration.
Well, that's their modus operandi today. So what's to be done about this?
Well, I would urge anybody to go examine our documentary so they can hear the stories about the impact this will have on coastal communities.
And where do people go to see that?
slfliberty.org. Go to our news section, and you can find a link to our YouTube channel with the mini documentary about overregulation.
Let me repeat that. slfliberty.org.
Yep.
slfliberty.org.
Correct. And if you just go to our page and our current news, you'll find a link to the mini documentary, which is on our YouTube page.
How long is this?
Oh, the documentary itself is only about 8 minutes. It's not hard to tell this story. It has a pretty stark effect on people who make their living on the water.
What happens next? Do you litigate it to get rid of it, or
well,
what?
We're hoping that they don't go forward with the rule, and we're hoping that they withdraw the rule so it just can't lay around dormant. But if they are unwise enough to go forward with the rule, Southeastern Legal and our partners at Texas Public Policy Foundation are ready to sue. We will ensure that we will take all actions necessary.
Where, in what court will you sue?
This rule affects people all across the country, and we have acquired representation agreements with two people, one of which owns a charter fishing boat on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, who is based in Houston, Texas, and the other of which is a homeowner on the Outer Banks who oftentimes takes these charter fishing trips, and he's out of Amarillo, Texas.
So I'm thinking Texas.
Sounds like Texas.
Because, and this is the thing that's so weird about this. If there's any litigation in federal court in the District of Columbia, or even in that circuit court, it's just like all the J6 prosecution. Nobody got a fair trial there. In my view, nobody got a fair trial. And this is me, not you. Because you might have to practice here someday. But it seems to me that the choice of venue matters a great deal. And I think you're wise to not choose the District of Columbia.
I just go where my plaintiffs are, and they happen to be in Texas.
A smart selection of plaintiffs, as I would say. So, okay, who is the person within NOAA and the fisheries group, the bureaucrat who decides whether to push this out or to hold it for the remainder of the Biden administration?
Ultimately, it comes down to, quote, the secretary, which is in this
Raimondo?
case, the secretary of Commerce.
Oh, my goodness.
And
this is not going to be good.
Well, and if you...
Raimondo, the former governor of Rhode Island, knows nothing about commerce.
Well, she is also has been on the bad end of a pretty significant recent Supreme Court case, that being the Loper-Bright decision, which overturned Chevron deference. And interestingly, that too was a fishing regulation enacted by the National Marine Fisheries Service, the sub-agency of NOAA.
That's the lead right here. We get to the lead
I'm
at
sorry,
the end
I buried
of the
the
interview.
lead.
You
Yep.
buried the lead, but that's good though. Yeah. Just for our listeners, explain briefly. The Chevron decision was a landmark decision of the Supreme Court in the 1980s, and it was overturned in this Loper decision.
That's right. It's one of the most significant Supreme Court decisions, certainly of the last term. But in a nutshell, Chevron was a very boring case that you have no reason to care about. But the result of it was that anytime there's a legal dispute in courts over the scope of an agency's power, as long as the agency can claim to a court that the statute was in any way ambiguous, which most of them are, then courts were obligated to defer to the agency's reasonable
One of the
interpretation.
worst decisions in the history of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it was a huge thumb on the scale in terms of challenging an agency's exercise of power. But last year, in the aforementioned Loper-Bright v. Raimondo decision, the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to do it.
This was like a small lobster fisherman,
Herring fishermen.
herring fisherman out in the coast of Massachusetts or Maine. And
Yeah, what happened in the in the case was there are federal monitors who monitor herring fishermen catches, which is, in and of itself not too controversial. The law then placed federal monitors on board the ships, which, that's one thing, but at least that had been authorized by Congress. Only the agency ran out of money. And then when it ran out of money, what it decided it could do is enact a rule that said the herring fishermen have to pay the cost of the federal
And they're
monitor
not
board.
making a lot of dough.
No, and it was under the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, which is different from the Marine Mammal Protection Act. But interestingly enough, the statutory language that purportedly gave them that authority said that they had the authority to enact necessary and appropriate regulations.
Boom.
So you
Well,
see that sort of
yeah.
really high-level, vague language all across the statutory code.
Go to
slfliberty.org.
slfliberty.org.
Correct.
8 minutes. You got it. You got 8 minutes. Watch it.
Watch it, and it's really gripping.
It's gripping. It's very good.
I'm featured.
Of
too,
course.
Right. So
All-star panelist.
all-star panelist, not in the caption, but it should be.
Braden Musso, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
All right, back with more after this. Phil Klein joins us by phone.
Welcome back to the Michael Patrick Leahy Show. Now, here's Michael Patrick Leahy.
Welcome back. We welcome to our Newsmaker line a very good friend, one of the leading legal experts in the country, professor of law at Liberty University, also former attorney general for the state of Kansas, Phil Klein. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you.
Glad to have you. Well, legal stuff is just always front and center. Here we have, 39 days until Donald Trump becomes the 47th president of the United States. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is just doing all sorts of crazy things. They're sending money out. They're getting regulations in. They're issuing pardons. Do you have a thought about the tradition of presidential pardons and how far Joe Biden is likely to go beyond this blanket pardon that he gave his son for 10 years and 11 months of whatever he did during that 10 years and 11 months, he got off scot-free?
Well, that pardon, the scope of the pardon, the personal benefit to the Biden family, the scope of what legitimate investigation should occur that now will not bear a fruit of any criminal charges, at least against Hunter, is unprecedented. But then again, the actions of the Biden family over the past 20 years have been unprecedented in acting contrary to American interests and consistent with interests that bear some type of relational or financial fruit for the Biden family. So we haven't seen this before. Now, I think that there is a chance that he might issue additional pardons, but what I believe, Michael, needs to happen is that the history books need to be corrected. In other words, the corruption within America's agencies, investigative agencies, that covered for the Biden administration, that wrongfully weaponized the criminal justice system against political enemies. That investigation must take place. And actually, the pardon of Hunter Biden could aid that investigation in that he cannot assert a Fifth Amendment privilege
good
for
point.
not providing information within the scope of the pardon.
Here's something, Phil, if I could just add related to
Yeah.
what you're talking about. This just came out today from our friend John Solomon at Just the News. The Inspector General of the Justice Department finds that the Justice Department spied on the nominee, President Trump's nominee to head the FBI, Kash Patel, and other congressional staffers without telling courts. As a result, the department obtained phone records from 2 members of Congress and 43 staff members, including Kash Patel. Isn't that a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Well, I've long believed that there was a degree of cooperation between the partisan January 6th committee and the Justice Department to use wrongfully the scope of subpoena power of a congressional investigative committee to sidestep the Fourth Amendment, which would apply in a criminal investigation of the Justice Department. In other words, the information obtained by J6 seamlessly went to the Department of Justice to try to manufacture further action by the Department of Justice. And it was information the Department of Justice could not obtain. As you know, Michael, I was subpoenaed by January 6th, and they actually subpoenaed my donor records for a nonprofit that we run. I refused. That was even unconstitutional, in my opinion, for the J6 committee to subpoena those donor records. It is definitively unconstitutional for the Department of Justice to do so under the guise of their claimed investigations. In any event, I refused. But there are those who did not refuse. And those subpoenas were wrong. And when you take a look at the scope that Attorney General Garland gave to Jack Smith in his investigation, it was far beyond any scope of any Department of Justice special counsel when investigating Biden. When investigating Biden, the scope was look at the classified documents that were found and turned over by Biden and see if he violated the law. The scope for Jack Smith was investigate anybody affiliated with Trump, who worked with Trump, or who supported Trump, relating to any claim that would have interfered with the 2020 election. Well, that's unprecedented. That's a scope that exceeds anything we've ever seen before with a special counsel in the United States, and it was just a clean slate for Jack Smith to go after and intimidate anybody tied to Trump. That, I believe, needs to be investigated. It needs to be understood, and the history books corrected, because the media, the legacy media, or whatever we want to call them, has been a part of the cover-up, and we can't allow that to stand. Now, I'm not certain if it brings forth criminal charges, but America deserves to know the truth. And now Hunter Biden can't assert the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah, that will
help us understand the truth relating to who helped him within the Department of Justice.
So this abuse of the rule of law and the rights of many Americans that went on under the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, the J6 committee, the FBI. On January 20th at noon, Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States. Are you optimistic about the ability of the Department of Justice, with Pam Bondi as the Attorney General, Harmeet Dillon as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Kash Patel likely as the Director of the FBI? Are you optimistic that this new team will be able to set things right?
Well, I'm hoping so, but it's going to take a sustained effort. It's going to take an effort that exceeds the Trump presidency, and it's going to take the cooperation of Congress. They need to clean house. We need civil service reform. We need to eliminate this revolving door and the flow of money through nonprofits to engage in government operations when those nonprofits are not accountable. And I think we've talked about this before, Michael. I would eliminate nonprofits. That's just government giving a license saying that we will give a tax break if you give the ideas that we support. And if you look throughout human history, governments have used that to threaten and coerce behavior. And the Biden administration started to do that. They tried to do it with my nonprofit. You talk to conservative nonprofits, they've been subject to audits, they've been subject to reviews, they've been subject to claims. In fact, I would say that the tax deduction is more than made up in what we pay for compliance with all the government demands.
Amen, brother, to that one. I mean, that's...
Yes, and if we eliminated it and we took that revenue and reformed taxes by bringing the tax bracket down, because government would get a windfall, because suddenly what you gave to nonprofits would be taxable, but you reduce the tax rate, you move towards a flat tax to eliminate all the trades and corruptions, or you institute a flat tax to eliminate all the corruption playing within the tax code to political favorites for donations and support, and you clean this thing up. That's bold action. It's going to take Congress, and it's going to take a committed presidency, and it's going to take the Trump cabinet to do it, because he's appointing outsiders who are going to fight that cabal. And it's still powerful. There's still a lot of power within the woke movement and the Marxist-leaning Democratic Party.
Phil Klein, a professor of law at Liberty University. Phil, I saw this report late last night that the Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk Department of Government Efficiency, which is not really a department, it's more of a commission with a direct line, if you will, to key players in the Trump administration. One of the things they want to do is to place a Department of Government Efficiency representatives in all the major departments to kind of, almost like an inspector general approach. Well, do you think that they will be able to do that? Is there a statutory capability to do that?
Well, they could use some statutory enabling support. Now, the concern is if we add a new layer of government upon government, you're not really cutting much. And so I think they have the ability to do what they need to do right now, one of the things that has been discussed is to make the Inspector General more independent of the agencies that they inspect, and also to bolster. Really, we need to bolster transparency.
So let me just interrupt there for a moment. Every major department has what's called an Inspector General. Tell us what their mission is and what their track record has been.
Well, their job is to independently, so to speak, review the actions of a government agency to ensure that the government agency is acting within the scope of authority provided by statute. You know, an administrative agency has no independent authority beyond what Congress has granted to them. But Congress has engaged in laziness and granted broad authority so that there's really not a review of the scope of the actions that they engage in. Those were the issues, for example, for Biden saying we're going to eliminate student loans. It was so far beyond any scope that was given that even the United States Supreme Court said, wait a minute, that's a violation of the separation of powers for Biden to try to claim to do this within the administrative agencies. But they're to look at whether those actions are within the scope. They're to look at whether the actions of the agency violate other laws within the United States. And they're also to report as it relates to and provide information as it relates to wrongfulness and treatment of employees and also misuse of funds. So they are supposed to be America's eyes to hold the administrative state accountable to the rule of law. But they are conflicted because they are housed within the agencies. And they don't have a mandate, a clear mandate to really be responsive to the United States Congress. So, you know, we can strengthen our IGs with reform, but what we really need to do is a couple of things. Congress has got to stop passing laws that say, we've got a problem with happiness in America, so we give the administrative branch all the authority to try to fix people who are depressed in America, and suddenly we've got an agency running wild and arresting people who got fired from their job because they're frowning publicly. That's the kind of stuff that Congress has been doing.
You say that almost in jest, but, you know, it's kind of true.
Oh, it is true. In fact, I've been saying that for years, and just recently, Michael, I want to say 6 months ago, the California legislature, the Senate, guess what? Created a committee on happiness. A legislative committee on happiness.
Oh, my goodness.
It made me decidedly unhappy that they would create such a
exactly.
Committee.
Well, Phil Klein, it is always such a delight to have you come here and give us your perspective and your vast expertise on law and the rule of law. Phil, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Well, when we get back, I'm Michael Patrick Leahy.
Hey there, this is Lenny McGill, founder and CEO of The Glock Store. As a proud sponsor of this show, you may have heard Michael Patrick Leahy mention us a few times over the past 4 years. But today, it's me on the radio telling you how pleased we are to be associated with Michael Patrick Leahy and his dedication to the highest levels of professional journalism. Michael Patrick Leahy has been threatened with jail time in bringing the true facts about that Nashville Covenant shooting to his listening audience. Michael Patrick Leahy, you keep doing what you're doing, and we here at the Glock Store will keep sponsoring your show for the good of Nashville and the entire country. And I'm personally inviting all of your listeners to come visit and shoot at the Glock Store. It's where Michael Patrick Leahy learned to shoot a gun for the first time and where he bought his own personal Glock 19. I'm Lenny McGill, founder and CEO of the Glock Store here in Nashville, just minutes from the airports, worth the drive from anywhere, and a proud sponsor of Michael Patrick Leahy and the Tennessee Star Report.
My fellow Americans, I have to tell you about my good friends at D.T. McCall & Sons. They have furniture and appliances and a lot more. They've been family-owned in Middle Tennessee for over 100 years, and they're not going to rip you off. No hidden charges, no delivery charges, no charges for all of the crazy things. These are sick people at the lumber yards. These are very sick people. They charge you for cords and hoses and haul off. They charge you for all of these things. They call them hidden charges. It's the type of surprise that you don't want to see. It's like an October surprise, but it's worse. D.T. McCall & Sons, they're not going to do that. They're great people. They're going to give you a great deal. With locations in Lebanon, Carthage, Lafayette, Cookeville, and Franklin, D.T. McCall & Sons will give you the deal of your life. Check them out today or go to dtmccalls.com.
Impersonator not endorsed by Donald Trump.
Welcome back to the Michael Patrick Leahy Show. Now, here's Michael Patrick Leahy.
Well, we've talked about some heavy legal issues, very interesting, with, of course, our good friend Braden Busek and then Phil Klein in the first part of the show. It's time for a couple of palate cleansers. Okay. Well, some clips here that are kind of funny, interesting. We start with clip 15, which is Ari Fleischer, who was press secretary for George W. Bush. And he has some ideas about what the White House press briefing room ought to be like. Here we go, clip 15.
Number one, what is your advice to Caroline Leavitt? She's capable, she's talented, but she's young. So what do you wish you would have known going into that job?
She's in a totally different era than I was when I was in that job. When I was in that job, America still relied on the mainstream media, for better or worse, to tell them what was happening. That era is over, Charlie, as you know. I wrote an op-ed in The Hill a couple weeks ago where I advocated that the 49 seats in the briefing room no longer go to the New York Times, CBS, ABC, NBC, the Washington Post, the mainstream media. The front rows should move to the back rows, or they shouldn't get a seat at all. And the front rows should now be alternative sources. It should be conservative media. It should be podcasts. It should be talk radio. It should be respectable social media influencers. That's how Americans get their news these days. People no longer get their news from the mainstream media. And that room is a throwback to the 1980s. And so I urge them to modernize the room, put it in tune with how people consume news today. What does that look like? That looks like you allow the front rows to be filled with conservative media, the Daily Examiner, the Daily Wire, somebody from your show, Charlie, somebody from Joe Rogan's show, a producer. It looks like the way people get their news.
And the Star News Network, the Tennessee Star, we should be there. I think John Fredericks is going to be there. John Fredericks is moving his weekday operation to Washington, D.C., just across the street from the White House. And look, he needs to be there. He needs to be in the front row. And then we'll bring him on. And when they hold a briefing, John will be there, and he'll broadcast directly to us on this show. So I think that's a great idea. Okay, now, Ari Fleischer talked about how it's a new era, and it is a new era. A lot of the old regime media talking heads don't realize it's a new era. Well, our friend Sebastian Gorka, who's now going to be in the White House on January 20th, again for a return visit. Was on the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, with commentary about John Bolton. John Bolton had served as the acting ambassador to the UN under George W. Bush, and then for about a year and a half, he was the national security advisor in the first Trump administration. Then he got fired. And he's been a Trump critic ever since. Sebastian Gorka has the most brilliant takedown of John Bolton that could possibly exist. Here we go. Here's Sebastian Gorka on John Bolton, BBC, clip 16.
The former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, called you a con man, saying he wouldn't have you in any US government. I mean, you probably don't like the way tempers seem to flare around this man.
Yeah, sadly, your description is woefully inadequate. John Bolton has nothing to do with MAGA or America First.
MAGA won. He was Trump won, wasn't he?
Can I finish?
Oh, no, I think it's...
Him and his risible 1970s porn moustache. This is a man who has announced on British television 18 months ago, and yes, I'm running for the presidency of the United States. Hey, Johnny, whatever happened to your campaign? In the British interview in which he said, and President Trump's popularity in America is in terminal decline. Hey, Johnny, did you know what we did 32 days ago? Bolton is an irrelevance, a neocon who may have served for a short time in the Trump administration, but he is definitely not MAGA today, and nobody takes him or his mustache serious.
You gotta love Seb Gorka. Nobody takes him or his mustache seriously. That is the ultimate put down of John. And John, you know, he's an intelligent guy who just doesn't realize that his era is over. It's time to hang him up, John Bolton. And I think we told you, we went and met with him in 2011 when he was considering a presidential campaign, and he seemed sane then. But I think something happens when you're at the levers of power and you get fired, and you know, your brain goes discombobulated. And I'm afraid John Bolton's brain and his mustache, or as Seb says, his mustache, they're both discombobulated. Hey, we'll have more. We'll hear from Steve Bannon when we get back. I'm Michael Patrick Leahy.